Imagine opening your mailbox on a regular Tuesday afternoon. You're tired from work, you're thinking about what to make for dinner, and you're flipping through the usual pile of grocery store flyers and credit card offers. And then you see it. A thick white envelope from your HOA. Now, normally, you just toss it on the counter and open it later. But something about this one feels different. It's heavier. It's thicker. And when you finally rip it open, your stomach drops. Because staring back at you, printed in bold black letters on crisp white paper, is a number you cannot afford. $50,000. Not 50. Not 500. $50,000. Due in 90 days. Per household. No negotiation. No payment plan. Just pay it, or lose your home. That's exactly what happened to every single family living in the quiet little subdivision of Willowbrook Estates. 78 homes. 78 families. 78 mailboxes that all got the same envelope on the same day. And by the time the dust settled, that one piece of paper had destroyed marriages, wiped out retirement accounts, forced grandparents out of homes they'd lived in for 30 years, and turned neighbor against neighbor in a way nobody ever thought was possible. This is the true kind of story that plays out in HOA communities across America every single year, and most people don't even know. It's legal. Today, I'm telling you the whole thing. How it started. Who was responsible? What the board hid from residents. And the shocking twist at the end that finally made someone pay. This is the story behind the $50,000 special assessment that bankrupted my neighborhood. And if you're a homeowner, a future homeowner, or anybody who pays HOA dues, you need to hear every single word of this. Because what happened to Willowbrook Estates could absolutely happen to you. I'm gonna walk you through the whole mess, start to finish. The quiet warning signs the residents missed. The board meeting that changed everything. The lawsuit. The betrayal. And the twist nobody saw coming. Grab a seat. Get comfortable. And hit that subscribe button, because stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Let's get into it. Willowbrook Estate sits just outside a mid-sized town in North Carolina. It's the kind of neighborhood that looks like something out of a real estate commercial. Tree-lined streets. Manicured lawns. A little community pool with a wrought iron fence around it. A clubhouse with a kitchen and a fireplace that only gets used twice a year, usually around Christmas. The houses are all two-story colonials, painted in approved shades of beige, gray, and pale yellow, because of course the HOA had a strict color palette written into the CC and RS. Most of the families living there were middle class. Teachers. Nurses. A few engineers. A handful of retirees who bought in back when the subdivision first opened in the late 90s. Good people. Hard-working people. The kind of folks who paid their dues on time and waved at each other from their driveways. Now, our main character in this story is a woman named Diane Marcetti. Diane was 54 years old, recently widowed, and worked as a bookkeeper at a local accounting firm. She'd lived in Willowbrook for 19 years with her late husband Tony, and after he passed from a heart attack 2 years earlier, she decided to stay in the house instead of selling. Too many memories. Too many pictures of him in the backyard he'd built with his own two hands. Diane wasn't what you'd call an active HOA member. She paid her $400 quarterly dues. She mowed her lawn. She kept her shutters in good shape. And she mostly stayed out of the politics. That all changed in February of that fateful year, when she pulled the thick white envelope out of her mailbox. But to understand how things got to $50,000, we have to go back a little further. About 6 years earlier, Willowbrook Estates had hired a new property management company to oversee the HOA. The company was called Sterling Community Services, and it came highly recommended by a board member who happened to be good friends with the owner's brother-in-law. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Sterling seemed professional. They wore nice suits to board meetings. They used fancy accounting software. And most importantly, they kept the monthly dues low, which made everybody happy. But here's the thing. Low dues don't always mean a healthy community. In fact, they often mean the opposite. Because every HOA has what's called a reserve fund. That's the pot of money set aside for big-ticket repairs down the line. Roof replacements on the clubhouse. Repaving the streets. Fixing the drainage system when the storm pipes start to fail. A healthy reserve fund should be funded at somewhere between 70 and 100% of projected future costs. Willowbrook Estates, under Sterling's watch, was funded at about 11%. 11. Which means if anything major broke, there was no money to fix it. And the residents had no idea. How did this happen? Well, Sterling Community Services had been telling the board for years that everything was fine. They were producing glossy financial reports with charts and graphs that made it look like the reserves were healthy. They were approving small cosmetic projects to make the place look maintained. New pool furniture 1 year. A fresh coat of paint on the clubhouse another year. Little things. Shiny things. Stuff residents could see. Meanwhile, the bigger, invisible systems were falling apart. The main sewer line that ran under the private streets was cast iron, originally installed in 1998, and it had been corroding for years. The retention pond out back was silting up and starting to overflow during heavy rains. The clubhouse roof had soft spots from a decade of uninspected water damage. None of it was being addressed. None of it was even being discussed in board meetings, and then, in the summer of that year, everything hit at once. A major rainstorm caused the retention pond to flood into 3 backyards, drowning landscaping and seeping into basements. 2 weeks later, the sewer line ruptured under the cul-de-sac on Magnolia Drive, and raw sewage started bubbling up through the pavement. And then, just to complete the trifecta, a building inspector showed up to do a routine clubhouse permit renewal and discovered that the roof was one strong windstorm away from collapsing. Suddenly, 3 massive projects needed to happen immediately. The total estimated cost, $3.9 million, divided by 78 homes. That's exactly how you get to a $50,000 special assessment per household. And this, my friends, is where the real story begins. The emergency board meeting was held on a cold Thursday night in a clubhouse. The same clubhouse with the roof that was about to collapse, which gave the whole thing a kind of sick poetic irony. Diane almost didn't go. She was exhausted from work and she'd been dealing with a migraine all afternoon. But her neighbor Paul, a retired firefighter who lived 2 doors down, knocked on her door that evening and told her she absolutely had to be there. "Something's not right, Diane," he said. "I've been looking at the financials. We need bodies in those seats." So she grabbed a cardigan and walked over. The clubhouse was packed. Standing room only. 78 homes and probably 120 people crammed into a space built for maybe 60. The board sat at a long table at the front. 5 of them. 3 men and 2 women, all dressed like they were about to read somebody's eulogy. At the center sat the HOA president, a man named Roger Blankenship. Roger was in his early 60s, a retired insurance executive who'd been running the board for almost 8 years straight. He had that smooth, practiced, corporate way of talking that made you feel like you were being gently but firmly sold something you didn't want. Roger stood up, cleared his throat, and laid it all out. The flood damage. The sewer collapse. The roof. The $3.9 million price tag. And then he said the words that hit the room like a grenade. After careful consideration, the board has unanimously approved a special assessment of $50,000 per household, payable within 90 days. Partial payments will not be accepted. Failure to pay will result in liens and potential foreclosure proceedings as outlined in Article 7 of the CC&RS. And then he sat down. For about 4 seconds, the room was completely silent. Then it exploded. People started shouting. One woman burst into tears. An older man in the back stood up so fast his folding chair flipped over behind him. And right in the middle of all the chaos, Diane raised her hand. Now, Diane wasn't a loud person. She wasn't confrontational. She'd spent her whole life being the quiet one in the room. But something about that number, $50,000, a number that represented the entire balance of her savings account, her emergency fund, and most of her late husband's life insurance payout combined, something about it woke something up in her. "Excuse me," she said, and she said it loud enough that people actually stopped yelling and turned to look. "Roger, how did this happen? Where were you people when the sewer line was rusting? Where were the inspections? Where were the reserve studies? Why are we finding out about a $4 million problem the same week we're being asked to pay for it?" Roger smiled that corporate smile of his. "Diane, I understand your frustration. These are unfortunate circumstances that no board could have predicted." That's when Paul, the retired firefighter, stood up next to her and said something that turned the whole meeting on its head. "That's a lie, Roger. And you know it's a lie. Because I have a copy of the reserve study Sterling commissioned 3 years ago. And it warned the board, in writing, that the sewer line was at end of life and needed to be replaced within 36 months. You had the report. You ignored it. You never even put it on an agenda." The room went dead silent again. Roger's corporate smile flickered for just a second, and in that second, every single person in the clubhouse saw the truth on his face. He'd known. He had absolutely known. Diane felt her hands start to shake. Paul reached into a folder he'd been holding and pulled out a stack of papers. Copies of the reserve study. Copies of emails between Sterling Community Services and the board. Copies of invoices showing that Sterling had been paid a management fee every single month for years while sitting on information that could have saved the neighborhood. He handed a copy to every resident in the room, and that was the moment the $50,000 special assessment that bankrupted my neighborhood stopped being an act of God and started looking a whole lot like something else. Something that had names attached to it. Something that had fingerprints. The questions started flying. Why hadn't the board acted on the reserve study? Why hadn't residents been told? How much had Sterling been paid over the years while this disaster was building? And crucially, did any of the board members have personal relationships with anyone at Sterling that might have influenced their decisions? Roger tried to regain control of the meeting. He banged a little gavel. He called for order. He said the board would schedule a follow-up meeting to address concerns. But the damage was done. People were angry. And a few of them, Diane and Paul included, were about to get very, very organized. Over the next 3 weeks, while the 90-day clock on that assessment kept ticking, a group of about 15 residents started meeting in Paul's garage. They called themselves the Willowbrook Homeowners Coalition, which was a fancy name for a bunch of scared, angry neighbors with spreadsheets and bad coffee. They requested every document they were legally entitled to under North Carolina HOA law. Financial records, meeting minutes, contractor invoices, communications between the board and Sterling. And what they started to uncover was worse than anybody had imagined. Because this wasn't just a case of a lazy board dropping the ball. This was something deliberate. This was something that, if proven, could send people to prison. And Diane, the quiet bookkeeper who'd never spoken up in a meeting in her life, was about to become the person who cracked the whole thing wide open. Here's where Diane's background as a bookkeeper stopped being just her boring day job and turned into the skill that would change everything. Because while Paul was great at rallying neighbors and writing angry emails to local news stations, Diane could actually read financial statements. And she could spot the things that weren't supposed to be there. Late nights in Paul's garage, surrounded by stacks of paper and a whiteboard covered in post-it notes, she started tracing the money. Every dollar in, every dollar out. And slowly, a picture started to form. The first red flag came from the landscaping contracts. For the last 6 years, Willowbrook Estates had been paying a company called Greenwise Outdoor Services for all their landscaping, pool maintenance, and snow removal. The annual contract was just under $400,000. Diane pulled the county business records for Greenwise Outdoor Services and discovered something really interesting. Greenwise was owned by a woman named Melinda Blankenship. Now, Blankenship isn't the most common last name in the world. And it took Diane about 11 seconds on Facebook to confirm that Melinda Blankenship was Roger's daughter. Roger, the HOA president, who had approved her contract. Every single year. For 6 years. Without disclosing the relationship. Without putting it out for competitive bids. Without ever recusing himself from the vote. The second red flag was even worse. Sterling Community Services, the management company that had been handling Willowbrook's finances, had a cozy little arrangement with an accounting firm called Hollister & Associates. Hollister did the annual audits. Sterling produced the financial statements that Hollister audited. And guess who sat on Hollister's advisory board? Roger Blankenship. For 4 of the last 6 years. Paid him about $18,000 a year in consulting fees. So basically, Roger was being paid by the same firm that was auditing the books of the HOA he was running. If that sounds like a massive conflict of interest, that's because it absolutely is. And if you're enjoying this investigation so far, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button, because we're about to get to the part where everything explodes. Paul took the findings to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A woman named Karen Oduya who specialized in HOA litigation and had a reputation for being an absolute shark in the courtroom. Karen looked at Diane's spreadsheets for about 20 minutes, slowly nodding, then put her reading glasses down and said one sentence that none of them would ever forget. Folks, this isn't a civil matter. This is a criminal matter. And I'm gonna need to call the state attorney general's office first thing Monday morning. That's exactly what she did within 2 weeks. The state attorney general's office had issued subpoenas for Sterling Community Services, for Roger Blankenship personally, for every board member, and for Greenwise Outdoor Services. Investigators descended on the clubhouse. Forensic accountants showed up. And the media got wind of the story. A local reporter named Jasmine Ferris ran a front-page piece in the weekend paper with the headline, "Neighborhood on the Brink. Board president faces self-dealing allegations." Suddenly, Willowbrook Estates was famous for all the wrong reasons, and Roger Blankenship was no longer taking anybody's phone calls. But here's where the story takes the darkest turn. Because the 90-day clock on the $50,000 assessment was still running. And some families simply couldn't wait for the investigation to play out. A family on Chestnut Lane with 2 young kids and a mortgage they were barely managing had to sell their home at a loss, just so they could pay the assessment and move in with relatives. They were gone within 30 days. An elderly couple, the Hendersons, who'd lived in Willowbrook for 28 years, drained their entire retirement account to pay the bill. 73 years old and starting over. A young widower named Marcus lost his home to foreclosure because he didn't have $50,000 and the board wouldn't work with him on a payment plan. He packed everything he owned into a U-Haul and moved back in with his mother in South Carolina. By the time the Attorney General's investigation wrapped up, 11 families had already been forced out of Willowbrook estates. 11 families gone. And the assessment was still being collected. The investigation finally came to a head at a press conference held on the steps of the county courthouse. The Attorney General announced criminal charges against Roger Blankenship for breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, and multiple counts of fraud. 2 other board members were charged as accessories for signing off on contracts they knew involved conflicts of interest. The owner of Sterling Community Services was charged with falsifying financial statements. And Roger's daughter Melinda was named in a civil suit seeking the recovery of over $1.8 million in inflated contract payments her company had collected over the years. Handcuffs. Perp walks. News cameras. The whole 9 yards. Roger Blankenship, the smooth corporate smiler who told Diane that the neighborhood's crisis was nobody's fault, was let out of his $1 million home in a windbreaker and khakis like some kind of reality TV villain, and the twist that nobody saw coming. During the discovery phase of the civil suit, investigators found something buried in Sterling's files that hit everyone like a freight train. 3.5 years earlier, a different board member, a woman named Eleanor Pritchard, had actually tried to raise concerns about the lack of reserve funding. She put together a memo. She presented it at a board meeting. She demanded that residents be informed. And 2 weeks later, she'd been voted off the board in a special session organized by Roger, on a pretextual claim that she'd violated a minor procedural rule. They'd silenced her. They'd kicked her out. They'd replaced her with someone more compliant. And then they buried her memo in a filing cabinet where nobody would ever find it. Until now. Eleanor, who'd moved away 2 years earlier still bitter about the whole thing, was flown back in to testify. She sat in that witness box and told the court everything. And the courtroom, packed with her former neighbors, absolutely lost it. Hey, real quick, if you're still watching this deep into the video, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was made for. Because here's the thing. Stories like this one, the $50,000 special assessment that bankrupted my neighborhood, they don't happen because one person was evil. They happen because a whole community stopped paying attention. And the best way I know how to fight back against shady HOAs, corrupt boards, and predatory management companies is to shine a flashlight on exactly what they do, over and over, until everybody knows the playbook. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button if this story is making your blood boil. And drop a comment below telling me, would you have stood up like Diane did, or would you have just paid the bill and moved on? I read every single comment, and some of the best stories on this channel have come from subscribers sharing their own HOA nightmares. We're just getting to the resolution of this one. Stick with me. Because what happened next, how the community rebuilt, who paid, who walked away, and what Diane did with the rest of her life, is honestly the most satisfying part of the whole story. Roger Blankenship took a plea deal about 14 months after his arrest. He avoided the maximum sentence by agreeing to testify against Sterling Community Services and by returning over $600,000 he personally pocketed through kickbacks, consulting fees, and inflated contracts funneled through his daughter's company. He got 18 months in minimum security federal prison, 5 years of probation, a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in North Carolina, and a permanent criminal record that follows him everywhere. His wife filed for divorce while he was still in the county jail. His daughter's landscaping company went bankrupt during the civil trial. And his house in Willowbrook Estates, the very same house he'd been ruling from for 8 years, was foreclosed on while he was behind bars. There's a special kind of justice in watching an HOA president get the foreclosure notice that he spent 8 years threatening other people with. Sterling Community Services was dissolved. Its owner pleaded guilty to 6 felony counts and got 3 years. The civil suits went on for another 2 years after that, but the total recovery for the homeowners was north of $2.4 million, which Karen O'Duya fought tooth and nail to secure. That money was redirected into 2 places. First, it was used to partially refund the families who paid the full $50,000 assessment. Not a complete refund, unfortunately. The damage to the sewer line, the pond, and the roof was still real, and those repairs still had to happen. But most families got back somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000, which took a lot of the sting out. Second, the remaining funds went into a new, properly managed reserve account, funded at the correct level, overseen by an entirely new board and a management company with a clean record for the 11 families who'd been forced out, though nothing could fully fix what happened. The Hendersons, the elderly couple who drained their retirement account, did get a significant refund that they used to move into a smaller townhouse in a nearby community. Marcus, the young widower who'd lost his home to foreclosure, received a settlement from a related lawsuit that helped him get back on his feet, but he never moved back to Willowbrook. Too painful, he said. And the family from Chestnut Lane who'd sold their home at a loss got a modest check, but their kids had already changed schools twice, and they were rebuilding their lives somewhere else. Some damage simply cannot be undone, no matter how much money gets returned. And that's one of the most important lessons in this whole story. Because even when the bad guys lose, the people they hurt don't always get their lives back. Now, what about Diane? Here's where it gets really good. After the investigation wrapped up, Diane was asked by the newly formed board if she'd consider taking a seat on it. At first, she laughed. A year earlier, she couldn't have pointed out the clubhouse on the map without help. Now she was being offered a leadership role. But Paul, still her neighbor, still her friend, sat her down on her front porch one evening and told her something she never forgot. Diane, you're the reason half of us still have our homes. You can't walk away now. Somebody has to make sure this never happens again. And that somebody should be you. She accepted. Diane Marcetti served as treasurer of the Willowbrook Estates HOA for the next 5 years, and during that time, the reserve fund went from 11% funded to 84% funded.